My beloved child, listen closely, because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you this way. There is a conversation happening in rooms you have never entered, voices lowering when your name is spoken, pauses filled with tension, eyes exchanging meaning without words. This is not imagination. This is real. Something serious has been unfolding behind your back, and it revolves entirely around you. Right now, as you are listening, there are people who thought you would never find out. They believed silence would protect them. They believed distance would keep you unaware. They believed time would erase the truth. But something shifted. A door cracked open. And through that opening, everything began to surface. You may have felt it already. A sudden heaviness without reason. A strange emotional pull, as if something important was happening far away but connected to you. Moments where your heart felt alert for no clear explanation. That was not random. That was the echo of conversations you were never invited into, arguments you never heard, decisions that carried your name without your presence. There has been a clash of intentions about you. Not a small disagreement. Not a casual discussion. This was serious. Voices raised, lines drawn, sides chosen. One side pushed for removal, exclusion, silence. The other side resisted, questioned, hesitated. And in the middle of it all was you, unaware, continuing your life while others tried to shape it from the shadows. Someone claimed you were no longer necessary. Someone suggested your influence should be reduced. Someone spoke as if your absence would make things easier. Those words were spoken confidently, as if the decision had already been made. But what they did not expect was resistance. Strong resistance. Because not everyone agreed. There was someone who stood firm and said no. Someone who reminded the room of your value, your impact, your unseen strength. Someone who refused to let your name be erased quietly. That is where the fight began. Not with noise, but with tension. Not with chaos, but with conviction. You were underestimated. They thought you would never sense it. They thought you would never notice the subtle changes, the sudden distance, the shift in tone. But your spirit is more aware than they realized. You noticed. Even if you could not explain it, you noticed. This part of the story matters deeply, because it explains why things around you have felt unstable, why certain connections suddenly felt strained, why opportunities seemed delayed for no clear reason. It was not because you lacked worth. It was because your presence was being debated without your consent. And here is the part they truly did not expect. The more they spoke against you, the clearer your importance became. The more they tried to push you aside, the more obvious your absence felt. Your name carried weight in that room, even when spoken with resistance. There was a moment of silence. A moment where everyone realized this was not as simple as removing you. That moment changed everything. You are not weak in this story. You are not powerless. Even without speaking, even without knowing, your influence was undeniable. That is why this situation escalated. That is why emotions rose. That is why this was not resolved quietly. Something about you disrupts comfort. Something about you challenges control. And when people feel challenged, they react. Sometimes with fear. Sometimes with opposition. Sometimes with secret plans. But understand this clearly and let it settle into your heart. If there was nothing special about you, there would be no fight. If your presence meant nothing, there would be no debate. If your future was insignificant, there would be no urgency to remove you. You matter enough to be discussed in rooms you have never entered. This is only the beginning of what you need to know. The next part reveals who initiated this situation and why the outcome is already shifting in a way no one anticipated. Stay with this moment. Let it sink in. What was hidden is now moving toward light. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything becomes undeniable. The fight that started quietly has now reached a point where secrets can no longer stay hidden. What was once whispered is now being questioned openly. What was once assumed is now being challenged. And the reason is simple. Someone made a move they should never have made. The moment they tried to remove you, something unexpected happened. The system they trusted began to resist them. Not because of rules, not because of sympathy, but because your presence was deeply embedded. Your contribution was tied to outcomes they could not replace. Your absence created gaps that could not be ignored. Behind closed doors, one voice asked a question that changed the direction of everything. What happens if they find out? That single question shifted the energy in the room. Because suddenly, the focus was no longer on removing you. It was on the consequences of you knowing the truth. Someone admitted something they never planned to say out loud. They said you were removed not because you failed, but because you stood out. Because you saw things others missed. Because you could not be controlled in the way they expected. That admission created tension like never before. Another voice responded with clarity. Removing someone like that never ends well. And that is when panic quietly entered the room. You were never meant to be sidelined. You were meant to be adjusted, limited, softened. But that did not work. Your natural strength remained. Your presence continued to influence outcomes even when you were not present. That is when the decision became drastic. What shocks people the most is this. The fight is no longer about whether you should return. It is about how to fix what has already been damaged by trying to remove you. Because things began to fall apart the moment you were pushed away. Opportunities stalled. Momentum slowed. Results changed. And no one could say it openly at first, but everyone felt it. Something important was missing. There was a moment when one person finally said your name differently. Not with resistance. Not with dismissal. But with realization. They acknowledged that you were not the problem. You were the stabilizing force. That realization did not bring peace. It brought urgency. Because now the question became how to reverse a decision without exposing the truth behind it. And here is where it connects directly to you. You may notice sudden attempts to reconnect. Unexpected messages. A shift in how people speak to you. A softening where there was distance before. That is not coincidence. That is strategy changing. They are trying to regain balance without admitting fault. They are trying to bring you back into alignment without confessing what happened behind your back. But the truth has its own timing. One person involved is deeply conflicted. They know what was done was wrong. They know you deserved honesty. And they know that once you understand the full picture, nothing will ever be the same again. This fight has already changed the path ahead of you. Not in a negative way. In a revealing way. You are seeing who truly recognizes your worth and who only saw you as convenient. And this is why this message matters now. Because awareness is returning to you at the same time power is shifting away from those who tried to decide your future without you. The next part reveals who is pushing hardest to correct this mistake and why time is suddenly running out for them. Stay present. What is unfolding is bigger than you were ever told. Something shifted the moment the truth began to breathe on its own. What was once whispered carefully behind closed doors started to feel unstable, like a structure built on silence that could no longer hold its shape. The people who spoke about you with certainty suddenly began questioning themselves. Confidence faded. Certainty cracked. And in that quiet crack, reality started to show. Here is what no one expected. The plan that was meant to quietly move forward without you began to stall. Not because of chaos. Not because of noise. But because doubt entered the room. One question changed the entire direction of everything. What happens if removing you creates a bigger problem than keeping you? That question lingered. Someone realized something important too late. You were not just a name on a list. You were a stabilizing force. You were the unseen connector. You were the one element that made other pieces work smoothly. When your removal was imagined fully, the consequences became uncomfortable to face. That is when the tone changed. The conversation about you no longer sounded like control. It sounded like fear of loss, fear of imbalance, fear of exposure. Because removing you would not erase what you brought, it would highlight it. One voice admitted something quietly, almost reluctantly. They said your absence would raise questions. Questions they were not ready to answer. Questions that could lead back to them. That single admission shifted the power dynamic completely. You see, this was never about you failing. This was about others realizing how much they depended on your presence while pretending they did not. There was a pause, a long one. And in that pause, the idea of removing you began to feel risky instead of powerful. That is when strategies changed, not to honor you openly, but to delay, to soften, to reconsider. But something else happened at the same time. You became aware, not consciously at first, but through intuition, through that quiet inner knowing that something important was unfolding. That awareness mattered more than anyone realized. Because once you became aware, even subtly, the balance tipped. You stopped shrinking without realizing it. You stopped doubting yourself as deeply. You stood differently. You spoke differently. You carried yourself with an unspoken clarity that unsettled those who thought they were in control. And they noticed. One person in that circle observed this shift and said something revealing. They said, "It feels like they already know." That sentence landed heavily. Because knowledge, once awakened, cannot be undone. The fight behind your back began to lose its grip the moment you stopped being energetically absent. Even without direct confrontation, your presence became undeniable. This is the truth most people never hear. Battles are often decided before words are spoken openly. They are decided in awareness, in posture, in self-recognition. And right now, you are stepping into that recognition. What was meant to quietly remove you has turned into something else entirely. A reconsideration, a hesitation, a growing understanding that you are not easily replaced, dismissed, or erased. This part matters because it marks the turning point. The moment where power begins to shift away from secrecy and toward clarity, toward you. The next part reveals what decision is now forming and why it will change how others approach you permanently. Stay here. This moment is shaping what comes next. Something decisive happened after the arguments reached their peak. What you did not see was the shift in power. When the voices finally lowered and the room grew quiet, it became clear that the plan against you was no longer moving forward the way it was intended. The energy changed. The confidence of those who wanted you removed began to crack. Silence replaced certainty. This is the part that most people never get to hear. The fight behind your back did not end with your removal. It ended with exposure. Questions were asked that no one was prepared to answer. Motives were examined. Hidden intentions surfaced. And suddenly, the focus was no longer on you being removed, but on why someone wanted you gone so badly. That question changed everything. Because when people start asking why, secrets lose their power. What shocked everyone in that room was the realization that removing you would create a bigger problem than keeping you. Your role, your presence, your influence had roots deeper than anyone admitted out loud. Documents, decisions, connections, unfinished matters, all of them quietly tied back to you. Pulling you out would unravel more than they could control. That is when fear entered the room. Not fear of you, but fear of consequences. Some tried to backtrack. Some tried to soften their words. Some suddenly pretended they had never been against you in the first place. But it was too late for that. The truth had already surfaced. Positions had been revealed. Loyalties had been exposed. And here is the once in a lifetime truth you deserve to hear clearly. The attempt to remove you ended up protecting you instead. It placed a spotlight on your importance. It forced others to acknowledge what they had been trying to hide. It triggered a reversal that could not be undone. You may notice changes soon. Messages that sound different. Attitudes that feel unusually careful. People who once ignored you suddenly paying attention. This is not coincidence. This is adjustment. This is damage control. This is the result of a fight that did not go the way they planned. There is a reason this moment feels heavy and meaningful. You are standing at a turning point you did not create but are about to benefit from. The very energy meant to push you out has started pulling you forward instead. Pause for a moment and reflect on this. If this message resonates, if you feel this truth connecting deeply within you, take a second to let your presence be known. Engage with this moment. Share your thoughts. Your voice matters more than you realize right now. And if you are still here listening, that itself is powerful. It means you sense that this is not just a story, but a reflection of something unfolding in your own life. Stay connected. Stay aware. This channel exists to bring clarity to moments like this, and staying part of it keeps you aligned with what is coming next. What happened behind your back did not end you. It revealed you. And what comes next will make that even clearer. Now listen carefully, because this is the moment where everything turns. And this is the part most people never hear until it is too late. The fight behind your back did not end in silence. It ended in exposure. Something was revealed that no one planned to reveal, and once it surfaced, the entire balance shifted. There was a document, not dramatic on the surface, just words, names, decisions written neatly as if nothing emotional was attached to them. But inside that document was proof that your removal was not about performance, loyalty, or necessity. It was about fear. Pure, quiet fear. Fear of what happens when you stay. One voice in that room finally said what everyone was avoiding. That you were becoming too visible without trying. That your presence was influencing outcomes without permission. That even when you were not speaking, things were moving in your favor. That kind of presence unsettles people who rely on control. This is where the shock happened. Someone admitted that removing you would create more damage than keeping you. That your absence would raise questions they could not answer. That people would start looking deeper. That patterns would break. And once patterns break, truth rushes in fast. That confession changed the tone of the room. The people who wanted you gone expected agreement. They expected quick approval. Instead, they faced hesitation. Silence stretched. And in that silence, your position quietly strengthened. What makes this moment powerful is not that they argued. It is that they realized something irreversible. You are connected to outcomes they cannot replicate. You carry a credibility that cannot be transferred. You have earned trust that does not disappear just because your name is removed from a list. And here is what no one expected at all. Your name was put back, quietly, without announcement, without apology. But not in the same way as before. It was repositioned, protected, watched carefully, almost cautiously, because now they know something they did not know before. You are not easily replaceable. The same people who spoke against you began adjusting their tone. Words softened. Concerns became compliments. Resistance turned into forced acceptance. Not because they suddenly changed, but because they understood they had lost leverage. This part of the story explains why you may soon notice a shift, a sudden change in how people respond to you, a different level of attention, a strange politeness where resistance once lived. That is not coincidence. That is the aftermath of a fight you never entered but still won. You were not removed. You were tested. And the test revealed something stronger than opposition. You survived without defending yourself. Remember this moment. Not with pride, but with clarity. When people fight about you in secret, it is because your presence matters more than your silence. When decisions are made behind your back and then reversed quietly, it is because truth has weight. This story is not over yet. The next part reveals who is now watching you closely and why your next move matters more than ever. Stay right here. This is where everything begins to align. Pause for a moment and feel this, because what you are hearing now is not ordinary information. This is the turning point. This is where everything that was hidden, delayed, and quietly manipulated begins to lose its grip. Behind closed doors, something unexpected happened, something that none of them prepared for, something that shifted the balance completely in your favor. The fight about you did not end the way they planned. In fact, it reached a point where control slipped out of certain hands. The same people who spoke confidently about removing you suddenly found themselves questioned. Their reasons sounded weak. Their logic started collapsing. Their certainty faded. And in that moment, the room changed. Someone asked a simple question, one that cut through all the noise. What happens if they are wrong about you? That question froze everything. Because deep down, they knew the truth. Removing you was never about necessity. It was about fear. Fear of your growth. Fear of your influence. Fear of what happens when you fully step into your position without interference. And when that truth surfaced, the entire narrative they built began to crack. You were no longer the subject being discussed. You became the standard they were measured against. This is why you may notice sudden reversals now. Messages that feel softer. Attitudes that feel confused. People who once ignored you suddenly watching you closely. They are recalculating. They are adjusting. They are trying to recover from a decision that did not go as planned. Here is the shocking part that very few ever get to hear. The attempt to remove you actually revealed how essential you are. It exposed the dependency they tried to hide. It showed that things do not move smoothly without your presence. Progress slowed. Stability weakened. And suddenly, your absence felt louder than your presence ever did. That realization cannot be undone. You are not being pulled out anymore. You are being pulled back in, but differently now. With caution. With awareness. With a respect that was never openly given before. And the ones who pushed hardest against you are now the quietest in the room. Let this settle in your heart. You were never losing ground. You were being tested without your consent, and you passed without even trying. Your calm confused them. Your resilience unsettled them. Your continued forward movement made their efforts feel small. This is why the atmosphere around you feels tense yet expectant. Something is aligning. Something is correcting itself. Not because they suddenly became kind, but because reality spoke louder than their plans. Remember this clearly. People do not fight this hard over something insignificant. They do not argue, strategize, and panic over someone who has no power. The intensity of what happened behind your back is proof of your unseen strength. And now, as this part ends, understand one final truth. The story is no longer about whether you will be removed. That chapter is closing. The new question being whispered is how to deal with you now that you cannot be ignored. Stay present with this. What comes next will surprise even those who thought they controlled the outcome. Beautiful truth. This is the moment where everything quietly turns in your favor, even if no one has announced it yet. What was once hidden as a dispute has now transformed into something far more intense. The fight behind your back did not end with a decision. It fractured into doubt, hesitation, and a growing realization that removing you created a problem no one expected. After all the arguments, after all the attempts to redefine your role without your presence, something strange happened. Silence fell again. Not the confident silence of control, but the uneasy silence of people realizing they may have miscalculated. Your absence was tested, and the result was uncomfortable for them. Systems slowed. Plans stalled. Conversations lost direction. The very people who believed they could move forward without you began circling the same questions, again and again. Why does this feel incomplete? Why is momentum missing? Why does this feel wrong? That is when your name returned to the center, not as a target, but as a solution. Someone finally said what many were thinking but were afraid to admit. That removing you did not remove the tension. It exposed it. That pushing you aside did not simplify things. It complicated everything. That the strength they tried to ignore was the same strength holding everything together. This was not spoken loudly. It was spoken carefully, almost respectfully, because by this point, your value was no longer theoretical. It was proven. You were never just a position. You were never just a presence. You were a stabilizer, a connector, a force that made things work without drawing attention to itself. And once you were gone, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. Here is the once in a lifetime realization that shocked everyone involved. The fight was never about whether you should stay or go. It was about who would lose control if you remained. That truth surfaced slowly, but when it did, it changed the entire tone of the discussion. Some people grew quiet. Others became defensive. A few tried to redirect the conversation, but it was too late. The pattern was clear. Your removal benefited a few, but your presence benefited many. And this is where the story becomes deeply personal for you. You may have wondered why certain people suddenly acted uncertain around you, why some voices softened, why others avoided direct conversation. That is because decisions were being reconsidered without knowing how to approach you again. Admitting a mistake is difficult when pride is involved, especially when that mistake involved underestimating someone who never needed permission to be powerful. You were not removed because you were weak. You were challenged because you were essential. Right now, there is an unspoken shift happening. Doors that were quietly closed are being unlocked without announcement. Plans that moved forward without you are being revised. Not publicly, not dramatically, but intentionally. The fight behind your back created something unexpected. It exposed the truth of your position, not in words, but in consequences. Pause for a moment and breathe this in, because what you are about to hear explains why everything suddenly feels different around you. The tension you sensed was not fading, it was tightening. The quiet discussions turned into urgent exchanges. The calm voices became firm. The situation around you reached a point where silence was no longer possible. Behind closed doors, the fight shifted direction. What began as an attempt to quietly remove you turned into a realization that removing you would cause more damage than anyone expected. Your name stopped being spoken casually. It was spoken carefully, strategically, as if each word carried consequences. One person finally said what everyone else was avoiding. They admitted that pushing you out created instability. They admitted that things stopped moving smoothly the moment your influence was questioned. Plans slowed down. Decisions felt incomplete. Results weakened. And suddenly, the room understood something powerful. You were never just present. You were foundational. This is where the story takes a turn that no one saw coming. The same people who once doubted you began to feel uncertain about their own position. They realized that removing you did not make them stronger. It exposed their dependence. It revealed gaps they could not fill on their own. There was a moment of discomfort, a moment where eyes avoided contact, because deep down, they knew the truth. You were not the problem they claimed. You were the balance they relied on. Someone tried to redirect the blame. Someone tried to change the narrative. But it was too late. The energy in that space had shifted. The fight was no longer about removing you. It was about how to move forward without admitting they were wrong. And here is what makes this moment unforgettable. Instead of asking whether you should return to your rightful position, the discussion turned into how to rebuild trust with you, how to approach you without revealing what truly happened, how to explain the delay, the distance, the silence. They underestimated your awareness, but they could not ignore your impact. You may have noticed subtle changes recently, messages arriving differently, people responding with more care, opportunities resurfacing in unexpected ways. That is not coincidence. That is correction. That is reality adjusting itself around your importance. The fight did not end with a clear winner. It ended with acceptance. Acceptance that you cannot be erased. Acceptance that your presence matters more than anyone was willing to admit at first. Acceptance that the future they are trying to protect includes you, whether they planned it or not. This part of the story is powerful because it confirms something you may have doubted about yourself. Your value does not depend on permission. Your relevance does not require approval. Even when you are unaware, even when you are silent, your influence speaks. And now, the conversations behind your back sound different. They are quieter, more respectful, more cautious. Because people no longer question whether you belong. They question how they ever thought you did not. Stay with this feeling. Let it ground you. What was once hidden is now unfolding in your favor. And what comes next will make it impossible for anyone to pretend this never happened. What you are about to hear now is the part they hoped would never reach you, because this is the moment where everything quietly turns in your favor. Until now, the discussions about you were tense, divided, unresolved. But then something happened that shifted the balance completely, something so unexpected that even the strongest voices in that room fell silent. There was a realization, not sudden, but heavy. The kind that presses on the chest and forces people to rethink every word they have spoken. They began to see what removing you would actually cost them. Not emotionally, practically, strategically, permanently. Someone finally said it out loud. If you are gone, everything changes. Systems weaken. Trust fractures. Outcomes collapse. The room understood that you were not just a name in a discussion. You were a pillar holding more together than anyone wanted to admit. And once that truth surfaced, the fight stopped being about control and started becoming about damage control. This is where the shock lives. Because the same people who argued against you began quietly rewriting their stance. Not publicly, not loudly, but subtly. A softened tone. A pause before speaking your name. A suggestion that maybe the decision was rushed, that maybe the timing was wrong, that maybe you deserve to stay exactly where you are. They did not apologize. They did not admit fault. But fear entered their voices. Fear of what would happen if you were truly removed. You need to understand this clearly. You were never powerless in this situation. You were powerful without even trying. Your consistency, your presence, your quiet strength did something arguments could not do. It exposed the truth. And here is the once-in-a-lifetime revelation that changes how this story ends. Someone who originally stayed neutral has now chosen your side. This person holds influence. Real influence. The kind that does not speak often, but when it does, decisions follow. When they leaned forward and spoke, the room listened. They said your name with certainty. From that moment, the direction shifted. Not because of emotion, but because of clarity. The narrative about you began to change. You were no longer described as replaceable. You were described as essential, necessary, irreplaceable. This is why things around you may suddenly start aligning again. Why communication that went silent may reopen. Why resistance you could never see begins to dissolve. You are not imagining it. The fight that once worked against you is now working for you. And the most powerful part of this moment is that you did nothing to force it. You did not beg. You did not chase. You did not defend yourself in rooms you were not invited into. Your value defended you when you were not present. Let that sit with you. Some stories end with loss. This one does not. This one ends with recognition, with reversal, with a quiet but undeniable shift back toward you. The people who tried to decide your future without you are now adjusting to a future that still includes you, and they will never underestimate you again. Stay with this feeling. Remember it, because this is the part of the story where everything they planned begins to unravel, and everything meant for you starts finding its way back. Something shifted quietly, almost invisibly, and that is why most people missed it. But you did not. Even if you could not name it, even if you could not explain it, your inner sense knew that the story behind your back was no longer the same. The fight that once felt distant has reached a turning point, and what is unfolding now is far more intense than what happened before. Behind closed doors, the tone changed. The confidence of those who wanted you removed began to weaken. Their words were no longer sharp. Their statements were no longer certain. Doubt entered the room, and doubt changes everything. When people begin to doubt their own decisions, the power they thought they had starts slipping away. One sentence changed the direction of the entire situation. It was spoken calmly, without emotion, yet it landed heavier than any argument before it. Someone said that removing you did not solve the problem, it exposed it. That single realization made the room go silent. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. You were never the obstacle. You were the balance. The shocking part is this. While they were arguing about you, they unknowingly revealed their own weaknesses. Every attempt to push you out highlighted what they could not replace. Every reason they gave against you revealed a gap only you were filling. They were fighting. But the fight was no longer about removing you. It became about what would collapse without you. At this stage, something unexpected happened. One person who was initially against you stopped speaking entirely. Silence can be louder than opposition. That silence was not agreement. It was realization. The realization that going further would create consequences they were not ready to face. You need to understand this clearly. When people stop pushing, it is not because they won. It is because they see the cost of continuing. Your name was spoken again, but this time with caution. Not with authority, not with control, with care. That change alone tells you how powerful this moment is. You are no longer being discussed as someone who can be removed. You are being discussed as someone who must be handled carefully. And here is the once in a lifetime truth that very few people ever experience. Without saying a word, without defending yourself, without even being present, you reached a position where others had to slow down because of you. That does not happen by accident. That happens when your presence carries weight beyond titles, beyond roles, beyond expectations. Some of them are now worried that you might already know. Others are afraid of what happens if you find out more. That fear is not about exposure. It is about loss of control. Because once you are aware, the balance shifts permanently. This is why things around you may soon feel different. Communication may soften. Opportunities may quietly reopen. Resistance may turn into hesitation. Do not rush this moment. Do not underestimate it. This phase is delicate, and it is powerful. The fight behind your back has not ended, but it has changed direction. And the direction is slowly, undeniably moving in your favor. What comes next is something no one in that room planned for, because it depends on a choice only you can make once the full truth reaches you. That is what makes the next part so important. Stay present. This story is unfolding exactly when it needs to. What you are about to hear now is the moment everything quietly turned in your favor. even though almost no one realized it at the time. While the arguments continued behind closed doors, while voices tried to sound confident, one truth kept surfacing again and again, and it refused to be buried. The truth was simple, powerful, and impossible to deny. Removing you created more problems than keeping you. This realization did not arrive loudly. It arrived slowly, uncomfortably, and with deep silence. There was a pause where no one spoke, because everyone felt it. Your absence was already being imagined, and the result was unsettling. Systems stopped making sense. Plans lost balance. Outcomes became uncertain. And in that quiet moment, the weight of your role became undeniable. Someone finally said it out loud. Not emotionally, not dramatically, calmly, clearly. They said that things had already shifted the moment your name was challenged. They said the tension in the room itself was proof that you were not replaceable. They said that pushing you away was not a solution, it was a risk. This is where the story changes. Because once that sentence was spoken, everything else that had been argued before started to collapse. The confident tone of those who wanted you removed weakened. Their logic began to crack. Their reasons sounded repetitive, forced, and thin. And everyone could feel it. The room knew which side was losing power. Here is the part that makes this once, in a lifetime. Someone who had previously stayed neutral finally chose a side. Not publicly, not dramatically, but with a decision that shifted the entire direction. That person had access, influence, and timing. And they decided that your future would not be decided in secrecy anymore. You were never meant to disappear quietly. What was meant to sideline you has now exposed how central you actually are. What was meant to reduce you has highlighted your reach. What was meant to silence you has amplified your presence without you saying a single word. This is why, recently, things have felt strangely paused instead of ending. This is why what looked like a closing door did not fully shut. This is why confusion turned into delay instead of finality. These were not accidents. These were corrections happening in real time. Someone is now reading decisions that involved you. Someone is revisiting conversations. Someone is questioning assumptions they once accepted without thought. And this is happening because the fight revealed something they cannot ignore anymore. You are not standing on unstable ground. You are standing at the center of attention, whether you asked for it or not. And attention always leads to truth. Remember this moment, because it explains why the energy around you is shifting again. The resistance is weakening. The urgency to remove you is fading. And something new is quietly forming in its place. What happens next is not about conflict anymore. It is about revelation. And the next part uncovers the unexpected outcome that no one in that room planned for, but everyone must now face.